Welcome to Pluralsight Expert Access. My name is Matt Allford and I'll be the host for this episode. If you're new to the series, this is where we gain access to some of the best minds in tech to hear how tech leaders are solving business challenges and hear their takes on what's new and what is next. I'm excited to chat with Tim Warner today, who unfortunately couldn't be here in person, but I wanted to have this conversation with him so badly that we've dialed him here remotely so that I could pick his brain today and get all of his knowledge out and into this session. Tim is a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, MVP, in Cloud and Data Center Management, who is based in Nashville, Tennessee. His professional specialities include Microsoft Azure, cross-platform PowerShell, and all things Windows Server related. He's also an author here at Pluralsight. You can find Tim via Twitter at TechTrainerTim, LinkedIn, or his blog, azuredepot.com. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here with you.
Really excited to chat to you today about all things certification. This is one thing I'm passionate about. I know that you're passionate about it, and you've done this for a very long time as well. So I'm really keen to explore your mind and get your take on a lot of the things that we're going to discuss today. So your expertise expands across many domains within information technology and education. And I'm curious, what led you to your passion for sharing and teaching your expertise?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I review my life and look back to even my life as a young boy, I've always taken to both learning as a student and teaching, even though it really wasn't formalized. I just naturally gravitated toward passing on the stuff I learned, whether it was how to conquer a particular Atari video game or playing the guitar or skateboarding or something that I did as a kid. It was always natural. Likewise, technology's been part of my life since I was a little boy. My dad's not a technologist as such, but he always was kind of a gadget guy. So he always brought home computers and stuff to play with. So those things coalesced. And ultimately, in around 1997, I wound up meeting my professional passion, becoming a technical trainer and IT professional.
I've been watching one of the new series that you've started doing on YouTube. And I will admit, with the travel I've done this week, I haven't caught the last 3 or 4 episodes. But that's Tim's IT Straight Talk. And I've really enjoyed the series so far. And I'd be curious to hear from your mind, what problems are you trying to solve in those videos? And can you share the format of it here and what you're doing as well?
Yeah, by all means. Thanks for mentioning it, and I appreciate your watching it. Yeah, I had some success on YouTube a few years ago when I published basically an end-to-end study guide for the AZ900 Azure Fundamentals certification. And it's always been, besides just the raw technology, the craft of teaching and public speaking, the soft skills of business. All of those have been another interest of mine. And due to life and due to work and all this other stuff, I wound up going well over a year without touching my YouTube channel. And I finally thought to myself, you know what? I think what's holding me back is all the overhead of thinking about, well, how do I style these videos and pre-plan them and make a release schedule? And I thought, the heck with all that. Why don't I just each morning when I come into my office to work, flip on the webcam and spend 10 minutes or so pontificating, hopefully it's more than that, on some subject that's related either directly or tangentially to IT. And my goal is more than anything else to pass on my experience, because I've got a couple dozen years of experience now, and hopefully help people feel more comfortable wherever they are, whether they're entering IT, in IT, and looking to make a change, or maybe some people could benefit from some of the episodes even if they don't work in IT. So it's been a very low overhead, easy to do thing. And I'm just keeping going with the momentum, because at night an idea will pop into my head to talk about it. I'll sleep on it. And then the next morning I'll just jot a couple notes down, record it, and there you go. So it couldn't be easier to produce, and I'm enjoying it and getting good feedback so far.
That's awesome. I got to say, from the viewer side of things, it's easy consumable content, right? There's a lot of talk at the moment around here about short form content, and I think the rawness of what you do, like you said, you flick on the camera, you hit record, and it's just a 10-minute discussion with yourself about a particular topic. I've found them to be really valuable already. So, and I'm sure many others have as well. Are you planning to continue it for? Have you got a set time in mind, or is it just a continuous rolling thing?
I plan to go indefinitely because it's enjoyable and easy to do. And almost always, I wind up before I go to sleep at night having an idea cross my mind. I got one from a commenter the other day that I really appreciated. Someone commented on YouTube that at first they didn't like my training because they thought I was being theatrical. And I thought that actually would make a good subject to talk about, being genuine versus theatrical and how those interrelate. So as long as the ideas keep popping into my gourd, I'll keep recording the videos indefinitely.
Excellent. That's great to hear. From my selfish perspective as well, getting access into your brain is a fantastic thing. So thank you for sharing the knowledge. Now, you've authored several books covering a variety of training material. Actually, one of your Tim's IT Straight talks was on the concept of authoring books and that modality. When it comes to certifications, what's changed throughout your career? As you said, you got into it in the 90s there. What's changed over the last 25 years? And do you find people still prepare with physical books, or are we talking online resources? Are we talking something else now, moving into this era of Gen AI, which we'll get into a bit later as well? But interested in your thoughts there around books and courses and where we're at with learning.
It seems at this point, as of 2023, most of the tech book publishers are staying away from certification because it's an even more volatile subject than IT. And the idea of publishing a print book on cloud computing is almost absurd to me at this point. What's changed? Well, I distinctly remember in the late 90s, preparing for my first certifications, I would always go to my local Barnes and Noble or Borders bookstore and I would buy an exam cram or an exam prep, a print house called Coriolis Press. They were really the standard as far as an easily digestible print book that gave you a summary of the exam contents and a bunch of practice questions. Those were really good. And then there something that still exists today, I think, as a mainline strategy would be practice test software. And back in the day, Transcender was the go-to for that. And I wound up working for Transcender as a writer back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. That was really nice. That was a good time. Um, the threat of brain dumps or something that's still around, in other words, stolen exam or pirated exam content. Back in the late 90s, people would just put up a GeoCities page and then just literally dump their brain what they remember from the exam. Now, of course, people are actually stealing the actual exams and then trying to resell them. But that's something that's been around the whole 20 odd years. Cert vendors have been experimenting with hands-on practical items for a long time, including Microsoft. I remember in the late 90s taking, I don't know if the whole exam was on IIS or if it was just a Windows Server exam that covered IIS, but there was simulation stuff where they would give you a mock-up of the IIS manager console and you could click parts of it that were just dead. You know, it was one of those totally canned things where you had to follow a particular click path. And now, of course, with Microsoft exams, you actually sign into the Azure portal and you're doing real work. But to come back to your original question, to succinctly answer it, how is preparing for the exams different? I really don't think it is, other than the form factor. I think that people are much less likely to find a quality cert prep print book. So instead, you're going to online. In the Microsoft community, you've got MVP blogs with a lot of those folks will put together what they call study guides, which is basically a mapping between the exam objectives and docs articles. Certainly the docs from the vendor are a site. And Microsoft's doing great work at their learn.microsoft.com site with free tutorials and free hands-on labs. But it still all boils down to the same three things: theory, practice, and then some kind of practice exam to tie everything together.
Absolutely, and those are the three pillars that I've often heard you speak about in your courses and in some of your content as well. And I don't know. Have you got any advice, or what do you do when you personally go to study for a certification in terms of mapping out, where you're at and which areas of the exam that you need to focus on? Do you have any particular methods that you use yourself to know, oh, these are my weak areas or these are my stronger areas within those objectives?
Yeah, I can give a good example on that. In my work at Pluralsight a year or more ago, I was asked to do a prep course on the Okta certified professional. And I had been an Okta end user for a long time because that's what we use at Pluralsight for single sign on. But I hadn't gone behind the curtain to do administration yet. So I was starting pretty much cold. And so the technique I use there is really what I'll use for any subject. First, a self assessment. Where am I at with this material? And with Okta administration, I have networking in my background and some single sign on protocol stuff. But by and large, I was cold. So I didn't even know what I didn't know. What did I do? Well, of course, I scoured the Pluralsight library to see if there were any existing Okta courses. I don't remember that there were. So I think I bought a couple courses from Udemy. And I also, at the same time, went through YouTube. That's a more difficult thing to do, I find, because the quality at YouTube, as you know, is so widely variable. Unless you get a recommendation from somebody, it could be a waste of time. But that initial phase of just trying to get my initial sea legs with the technology and what's on the exam is the toughest part. And I think it comes down to knowing yourself in terms of knowing how you learn the best. Do you need to be hands on to put things together fast? Are you a reader? Do you want to talk with others and have dialogue? Figuring out that. But there's no other way to put it than just grinding to get over that initial learning curve. That's such a satisfying feeling.
I did, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting to hear your take on how you have to go from, zero knowledge or knowing not much about the topic or the subject to becoming subject matter expert, to a degree in that technology, which is what a lot of us in this field have to do, right? We're in this field to learn and keep the brain ticking over and explore new technologies. If people in this field aren't on board with that, then they're probably going to get pretty bored with it.
Totally. I have a good friend who's unhappy with what she does now, and she's looking at IT principally to make a lot of money. And I'm like, look, test it out and make sure you have, if you don't like it, I don't know if the money is going to offset that because you always are learning. You have to be an eternal student to succeed in IT.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I know that you've taken a lot of Microsoft certifications over the last 20 or so years. I'm a little bit younger than you. I've taken a lot of Microsoft certifications in the last 5 or so years.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw an announcement recently, and I believe you're well across this as well, in that Microsoft have, for lack of a better term, open booked their exam. Now, I think
Mm-hmm.
we should clarify that it's not necessarily open book. You get access to the Microsoft Docs, right, at learn.microsoft.com during the exam. And I'd be interested in your take on this change and what you think this is going to mean for learners and people who are planning on sitting exams. I guess Microsoft specific now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I haven't taken an exam that uses that format yet, so I can't speak experientially. I'm kind of curious on how that'll feel and whether there'll be times during the exam session I might want to actually take Microsoft up on their kind offer. I think that it's a realistic accommodation and it tracks in the real world. Because you know as well as I do, if you're just looking up some number or a service limit or a quota, that's trivia that we can find with a quick search. You shouldn't have to keep that in your head from a memorization standpoint. Um, I think it's also smart because, from what I understand, it's not wide open access to learn.microsoft.com. It's just a filtered subset of their docs. And it could be useful for just doing a quick verification, but I don't think it would be workable for somebody to actually rely on that open book nature for a good portion of their exam. A little bit here and there, but I can't imagine somebody would be able to pass the exam trying to rely principally on looking up answers in the docs. So, in summary, I think it's a good idea because it reflects real world practice more. Um, Yeah, it's an interesting innovation. Of course, Microsoft has been allowing open book for their renewals, which I think is a great idea as well, because really the renewal is just meant to force you in a way to do a little bit of continuing education. That's all.
And that's reflecting what we need to be doing in the real world as well, right? So I'm I'm on board with the concept as well. I really like it because and something that I read from the team who made this change at Microsoft, they explicitly said we haven't extended the exam duration or the time you're allowed to answer these questions. So if you go into this aiming to use the documentation for every question, you will not make it through. It's not a strategy that you can use. So I like that they've been able to find that that layover between here's the docs, use them when you need them, but don't come in cold and expect to be able to look everything up. So I do really like that aspect of it. Another thing that I saw that they did, again, I haven't experienced an exam with this format either, but this only applies, sorry, I should reframe that. This doesn't apply to their fundamentals certifications as far as I'm aware. So things like the AZ 900 and AI 900. And I really like that take as well because those are meant to test you on your foundational knowledge, right? That's not so much getting into the weeds and deeper into the technology where you may need to look something up. I think at that level it's more conceptual, and do you understand this technology or this platform, and what users or consumers need to use that for. So that's been my take on it anyhow.
Yeah, I agree. And I often say that Microsoft explicitly targets those 900 series fundamentals exams, not even necessarily at IT professionals. They want as many people having conversational competency with their products and stuff as possible. So, I think that's why there's no hands-on in those. They're not overly technical. They are at a lower price point. They're at a shorter duration. All of that is to get more people certified at the fundamentals level.
Speaking of the hands-on, I really enjoy hands-on based exams, and there's another vendor, VMware, who at a certain level, when you get into the VCAPs, they call them, the VMware Advanced Professionals. One of their exams, you get thrown into a remote lab environment for 3 hours, and it's a series of go and configure this thing, or this thing's broken, go and fix it. And I've got to say that they're some of my favorite exams that I've ever sat because it reflected what I did on a day-to-day basis. So I'm kind of hopeful that some more hands-on comes into these labs. I know it can be a problem on the side of resourcing that at particular times, and there's some challenges around that. But I think it helps validate the learner's skills, and they know how to do the task, and potentially, hopefully, we can start to get away from some of the exam dumps that you brought up earlier in the conversation as well.
Yeah, I agree, because ultimately you have to do the work. I mean, if somebody were to use brain dumps to earn a certification and then maybe even pass a technical interview and get hired, and unfortunately I've seen this before, ultimately it boils down to can you do the work? And with a hands on lab, either you know how to do the work or you don't. It's really put your money where your mouth is, so to speak.
So I've seen a lot of your content coming out on the Pluralsight platform, Tim, is around generative AI and specifically on ChatGPT. So you've obviously been tasked with creating a lot of content around those technologies. I'd be interested in your take on Gen AI as a whole, the 10, 20,000 foot view on what that's going to do to the IT industry. And maybe that's a little unclear as to what impact it's going to have longer term. But I'd be keen on your thoughts around Gen AI.
Well, to put it succinctly, I'm a fanboy, and I am absolutely overjoyed to be making these Gen AI courses for Pluralsight. It feels like another specialization opportunity. Because although I'm a generalist, or I call myself an IT generalist, I've mainly been in the Microsoft technology stack. And then several years ago, I just fell into Azure and fell in love with it, and that became a specialty. And now Gen I is the same way. I'm really enjoying it. I've been explaining generative AI to people in the same way that if they're old enough to remember the World Wide Web in the mid 90s, where it was like, wow, this is obviously an earth shattering development that's not only going to affect the IT industry, but all industries. I feel exactly the same about these large language models. Now, I'm principally with the OpenAI models, but I know that uh, the other technology vendors are developing their own LLMs, but it's still all of the same kind of thing. My impression working with it every day for the last several months has been this is not a flash in the pan. This is not a drill. It's not going away. Individuals and businesses are realizing huge efficiency increases by using these LLMs. And the biggest concerns that businesses would have are the standard ones: privacy and security, and private access. Can you customize the model, make it smart on my own line of business data, those sorts of things. So I like to hone in on those always. But yeah, it's the real deal. I mean, a quick example of how a business could use generative AI is what we're doing at Pluralsight now. We're experimenting with taking the transcript from a video course, feeding it into a large language model, and having it generate assessment questions, summaries, study guides. I mean, this is stuff that normally is done manually by contractors like you and me. And so, it actually makes me think about that fear that is in the news, and it's legitimate. Will Gen AI put me out of a job? It will change the shape of some jobs, just like the World Wide Web did, just like robotics did. So I think my guidance that I've been giving in general is to get on top of this and get smart with this technology now, because you need a human behind it. I don't think the AI is going to completely replace humans. Get smart and wrangle that AI and make yourself really valuable in your industry.
That's really interesting because I view it as exactly the same as what you've just covered off there. And to a lesser extent, about 5 or 6 years ago, I found a lot of people were starting to worry about a lot of the automation that came into our industry in different ways. And as we've learned, automation didn't necessarily replace anyone. It's made some tasks and jobs more efficient and more reliable, but we still need the people behind the scenes to be driving these automations, right? And thinking through the processes of what does this need to do? How's it going to do it? What's the logic in there? We still need our good old brains to do that, right? So.
Yeah, and to your point about needing a human behind the scenes, we are so early days with generative AI. The scuttlebutt about ChatGPT hallucinating. I mean, that's a real issue. And so the idea of having ChatGPT generate a PowerShell script is all well and good, but you're still going to want to vet that code because there's a good chance that some of it may be outdated, may not be sensical, may actually be broken. So,
Mhm. And speaking of Gen AI, I haven't personally looked into this myself because I haven't actually sat a certification this year. But thinking back to our main topic here of certifications, have you put any thought process into using Gen AI effectively as another form of study material and helping learners as they start to move towards that exam date?
hmm yeah, I have. I've experimented with that quite a bit. For instance, you could ask the large language model, do a little role playing. You are an expert in all things Microsoft Azure. You're a technical trainer and you're teaching me the Azure Solution Architect skill set. Please give me some multiple choice questions on this subject. Do not choose all that apply. Put all your system prompt in there, and it'll happily generate items for you and give you an explanation of why the correct answer is correct and incorrect answers are incorrect. That's all well and good. Of course, the Achilles heel is that the training data in the OpenAI models, anyway, is cut off. It recently jumped up. It was September of 2021, but now it's showing January 2022. So hopefully that latency, the fact that you wouldn't be able to have ChatGPT give you questions on an exam that just published a few months ago because it doesn't know about it yet. But I think that eventually OpenAI will make their models more aware of current events, and hopefully we'll see the Bing search plugin come back. That's going to really unlock the ability of the language model to get current data. Because again, not only does IT stuff move so fast, but the certifications move fairly quickly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly for the paid models, I'd expect they'll want to try and reduce that latency, as you said, as much as possible. Yeah. I've got the hard question for you now. If you were thinking back to when you were starting your career, I know there's probably a bunch of particular advice that you'd give, but is there any one thing that stands out as being some advice that you'd give yourself at the start of your career?
I think if I were to visit myself in the past, some things I would say to myself are buckle up and prepare to be an eternal student, because technology is just going to move faster and faster as we go along. I would also counsel myself, don't be so hard on yourself. Give yourself a break. The scope of what you don't know and will never know is always going to be almost infinitesimal compared to what I do know. If I don't know something, ask, look up a good response, and that's totally okay. And probably the last thing I would say is, sounds kind of harsh, but be aware that all employees are expendable. I actually mentioned that on my YouTube channel the other day. Just always have in the top of my mind that as much as I love my employer and they love me, at the end of the proverbial day, I'm as subject to downsizing as anybody else. And that keeps me on my toes as far as keeping my skills sharp and keeping my eyes open.
I asked for one and I got quite a few, so I think we got value for money there. So thanks so much. There's some great tips there that you've shared with us. So I've had a great conversation. Thank you, Tim. I've really enjoyed hearing about your experience and getting the expertise out of your brain. So thanks so much for the time today and with the knowledge that you've shared with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Matt. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.